In 1945, Indonesia had a problem rare in modern history: how to unify a vast archipelago with hundreds of languages, 17,000 islands, hundreds of living languages, no shared tongue, and a declaration of independence that needed to mean something to all of it. They needed a national language, fast. The obvious choice was Javanese, 80 million speakers, the largest ethnic group, the most politically powerful. Every logic pointed there. They didn't pick it. They picked a language that already functioned as a regional trade language across the archipelago. It had no great literature behind it, no imperial history, no ethnic group claiming it as their own, and it worked. Within a single generation, tens of millions of people spoke it. Today, it is the fourth most spoken language on Earth by number of speakers. It might be the most successful linguistic experiment any government has ever deliberately attempted. And almost nobody outside of Southeast Asia knows it happened. Welcome to the Airlearn Language Show. One thing I find myself thinking about after researching the story: Bahasa Indonesia was specifically chosen because it was easy for speakers of different local languages to learn. No verb conjugations, no grammatical gender, no tonal system. The people who designed this language knew that a language nobody can learn is a language nobody will use. That is actually the whole philosophy behind Airlearn 2. Getting you into a language through the fastest, most natural path in. If you have been curious about it, go check it out. Link is in the description. Now, how did this actually happen? To understand what Indonesia chose in 1945, you have to understand what it was choosing between. The Indonesian archipelago is one of the most linguistically diverse places on Earth relative to its political boundaries. Hundreds of languages, not dialects, languages, spread across 17,000 islands, stretching across a distance wider than the continental United States. Javanese in the center, Sudanese in the West Java, Balinese in Bali, Batak in Sumatra, Bugis in Sulawesi, Dayak languages across Borneo, each with its own grammar, its own script, in some cases, its own literary and cultural tradition going back centuries. When Dutch colonial rule ended and Indonesia declared independence, the question of a national language was not just administrative. It was essential. A country of 17,000 islands with hundreds of languages and no shared tongue is not really one country yet. It's a collection of communities that happen to share a border drawn by someone else. Javanese was the logical answer by every numerical measure. 80 million speakers, the ethnic group that had run the most powerful kingdom in the archipelago's history, the language of the cultural and political elite. The founders of Indonesia looked at all of this and chose something else entirely. Malay had been the trade language of Southeast Asia for centuries, not because anyone conquered the region and imposed it, but because merchants needed a way to talk to each other across the archipelago's hundreds of ports and islands. And Malay was simple, widely encouraged, and belonged to no dominant power. That last part was the key. Javanese carried centuries of cultural weight, court hierarchy, and social stratification built directly into the language. Javanese has multiple speech levels. The words you use change completely depending on whether you are speaking to someone above, below, or equal to you in social rank. It is a magnificent and complex linguistic system. It is also exactly the wrong language for a new republic trying to signal that the old hierarchies were finished. Malay had none of that. It was flat, democratic in structure, and critically, it was not tied to any single dominant ethnic group in the way Javanese was. Choosing Malay meant no single ethnicity could claim the national language as their cultural property. It was politically neutral because it was not the language of the biggest group. The grammar was also deliberately accessible. No verb conjugations. Verbs in Indonesian do not change form based on tense, person, or number. No grammatical gender. No tonal system. Tense is expressed through context and time words, the way English uses yesterday or tomorrow. A Javanese speaker, a Balinese speaker, and a Batak speaker could all reach functional fluency in Indonesian faster than any of them could learn each other's language. They did not choose the biggest language. They chose the most learnable one. And they understood that those were two completely different things. Here's the part of the story that most people don't know. The choice was made in 1928, 17 years before independence. Indonesian nationalists, still living under Dutch colonial rule, still technically subjects of the Netherlands, gathered in Batavia, now Jakarta, and made a pledge. The Youth Pledge. One nation, Indonesia. One people, Indonesian. One language, Indonesian. They declared the national language of the country that did not yet exist for a people who had not yet been freed in a language most of them did not speak at home. The language was called Bahasa Indonesia, literally the language of Indonesia, a renamed and formalized version of Malay. By naming it Indonesian rather than Malay, the founders stripped away the ethnic association entirely. It was not the Malay people's language that was being elevated. It was a new language being born for a new nation. When independence came in 1945, the infrastructure was ready. Schools began teaching exclusively in Bahasa Indonesia. Governments operated in it. The national broadcaster used it. The press used it. Within a generation, children who grew up speaking Javanese or Sudanese or Balinese at home were speaking Indonesian at school, at work, in any interaction that crossed the boundary of their own community. Indonesia's choice looked obvious in retrospect. It wasn't. Two of its closest neighbors tried different approaches and paid for it. India chose Hindi in 1947. The logic was similar to what Indonesia had avoided. Hindi was the largest language, so Hindi became the default. The result was immediate and sustained resistance from South India, where Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam speakers had no historical relationship with Hindi and no intention of accepting it as a linguistic superior. The anti-Hindi agitation in Tamil Nadu in 1965 turned violent. Decades later, the tension between Hindi-speaking North India and the Dravidian South has never fully resolved. India has 22 officially recognized languages today, partially because the one-language approach failed to hold. The Philippines chose Filipino, based on Tagalog, the language of the Manila region and the dominant ethnic group as its national language. The resentment from Cebuano speakers, Ilocano speakers, and dozens of other groups who saw their languages demoted in favor of Manila's tongue has persisted for decades. The Philippines today has two official languages, English and Filipino, partially because Filipino alone was never accepted everywhere. Tanzania made the choice Indonesia made. Swahili, another trade language with no single dominant ethnic group behind it, widely used across East Africa for centuries, became the national language. Tanzania today is one of the most linguistically unified countries in Africa and one of the most politically stable. The parallel is not coincidental. The pattern is clear. Countries that choose the biggest language faced resistance. Countries that chose the neutral language found unity. Indonesia understood this before almost anyone else did. The experiment worked, and it is costing something. Javanese is spoken natively by 80 million people, with a literary tradition stretching back 1,000 years, with court poetry and shadow puppet epics, and a philosophical tradition of extraordinary depth, is losing ground among the young. Urban Javanese in Jakarta increasingly speak Indonesian at home. Their children may not speak Javanese at all. The same is happening to smaller languages across the archipelago, only faster. A language spoken by 2 million people on one island cannot compete with a national language backed by schools, media, government, and economic opportunity. Young people move to cities and leave their home language behind. The language that was chosen because it threatened nobody is now quietly and without malice replacing everybody. This is not unique to Indonesia. It is the story of minority languages everywhere. Welsh in Britain, Breton in France, indigenous languages across the Americas. What makes Indonesia different is that it did this deliberately, as a design act of national unity, with full knowledge of what it would mean. The founders made a choice. between two kinds of loss. Lose the country by refusing to impose a common language, watch it fracture along ethnic lines, the way so many post-colonial states did. Or lose the linguistic diversity by succeeding, watch the hundreds of local languages slowly fade as the national language takes their space. They chose to save the country. The languages are paying for it. Indonesia solved an impossible problem. 17,000 islands, hundreds of languages, and they found the one language that nobody owned and gave it to everyone. A language chosen not because it was prestigious or powerful or the biggest, but because it was the easiest to learn and the hardest to resent. The decision was made in 1928 by a group of young nationalists who were still colonial subjects, declaring a language for a country that did not yet exist. When independence came 17 years later, the linguistic infrastructure was ready. The country that emerged was improbable by any measure, and it held. The lesson is not comfortable. The most unifying language is rarely the most powerful one. It is the one that asks the least of the most people. Indonesia understood that. India learned it painfully. The Philippines is still learning it. And the languages that were traded away for unity, Javanese, Sundanese, Balinese, hundreds of others, are still there, still spoken, still carrying the cultures that existed before Indonesia was a word. But they are fading. And every language that fades takes a way of seeing the world with it that nothing else quite replaces. Indonesia made the right call for the country. Whether it was the right call for the languages is the harder question, one the country will be living with for generations. If this story made you curious about the languages of Southeast Asia, or honestly any language on your list, Airlearn is where I keep pointing people, and I'll keep doing it. The link is in the description. See you in the next one.